A baby is smiling at her mother, and in about 90 seconds, that baby is going to start falling apart in one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. The mother hasn't hit the child, she hasn't yelled, she hasn't even left the room. She's still sitting right there, close enough to touch. She's done just one thing. She stopped responding. Blank face. No smile, no sound, nothing. And in seconds, the baby notices. First the confusion, then the frantic effort. Bigger smiles, louder sounds, tiny hands reaching. Every trick a 6-month-old has to pull a grown-up back in. And when none of it works, the baby comes apart. Squirming, turning away, and finally going limp and hopeless, as if the sun slipped behind something and isn't coming back. That experiment lasted 2 minutes. Now imagine it lasting a childhood. Because what that baby just showed us, the panic, the reaching, then the collapse, is a sped-up preview of what actually happens inside a child who is neglected. Not hit, not starved, just not responded to. And the science of what that does to a growing brain is stranger and more disturbing than most people are ready for. So let's follow it, from that first blank face all the way to the adult it creates. Because neglect doesn't leave a mark you can see. It leaves it somewhere much deeper. That experiment has a name. In 1975, a developmental psychologist named Edward Tronick unveiled what he called the still face experiment, and it became one of the most replicated findings in all of developmental psychology. Before Tronick, a lot of people assumed babies were basically passive, fed, warmed, carried, but not really participating in anything. The still face destroyed that idea in under 2 minutes. It proved a baby is not a passive little creature waiting for food. A baby is a person running a desperate, constant experiment on the world, asking one question over and over. When I reach out, does someone reach back? For a well-cared-for child, the answer is usually yes. And every time it's yes, something is quietly built. Here's the key idea, and it's the thing almost nobody explains. A baby cannot calm itself down. It's born without the wiring to manage its own fear, its own stress, its own overwhelm. So it borrows yours. When a baby is distressed and a caregiver soothes it, the caregiver is literally doing the baby's stress regulation for it, lending it a nervous system until it can grow its own. Do that thousands of times, and the child slowly builds the internal machinery to self-soothe. That's what a childhood is quietly doing under the surface. It's installing the software for handling being human. So what happens when the answer to that question, when I reach out, does someone reach back, is no? Not once, like in the experiment, but again and again, day after day. To see that, scientists needed something almost impossible to study. And then, tragically, history handed it to them. This is the most important study you've probably never heard of. To understand it, you need a piece of history. In late 1980s Romania, government policy had left orphanages overflowing with more than 100,000 abandoned children. These weren't torture chambers. The children were fed, they were kept warm, they were physically cared for. But there was almost no one to respond to them, sometimes a single worker for dozens of infants. So the children were clean and full and safe and almost completely unresponded to. It was, tragically, the still face experiment run for years instead of minutes, on thousands of real children. In the year 2000, a team of scientists, Charles Nelson, Nathan Fox, and Charles Zena, began a study of these children that had never been done before, and for ethical reasons, can probably never be done again. It's called the Bucharest Early Intervention Project. They took 136 institutionalized children and did something a study almost never can. They randomly split them into 2 groups. One group stayed in the institution. The other was placed into high-quality foster care with real, responsive caregivers. Then they scanned their brains and followed them for years. For the first time, science could see, in a controlled way, exactly what chronic neglect does to a developing child, and whether it could be undone. What they found in the children who stayed is hard to hear. When they measured the electrical activity in these children's brains, it was reduced. One researcher described it like a dimmer switch turned down low, the neurons simply not communicating the way they should. On brain scans, these children had less gray matter and less white matter, literally less brain tissue in key regions. Their average IQ came in around 66, well below the typical range. Impaired memory, impaired attention and self-control, high rates of emotional and behavioral problems. The neglect hadn't just made them sad. It had physically, measurably altered the architecture of their brains. and there's a specific haunting behavior that showed up. Many of these children didn't form normal attachments at all. Some became indiscriminately friendly. They'd walk up to a total stranger and treat them exactly like a parent. No fear, no preference for the people who actually cared for them. It sounds sweet. It's actually a wound. A securely attached child knows who their safe person is. These children had learned that no one in particular was coming, so everyone and no one was the same. But before this gets too dark, I need to tell you the other half of what they found, because it's the part that matters most, and it's genuinely hopeful. Remember, half the children were pulled out and placed with responsive foster families. And those children recovered, partially, unevenly, but really. Their brain activity climbed back up. That dimmer switch turned back toward the light. Their IQs, their attachments, their emotional lives all improved. The damage was not a life sentence, but there was a catch, and it's the single most important finding in the whole study. Recovery depended on timing. The children placed into responsive care before about the age of 2 recovered the most dramatically. The ones rescued later still improved, but carried more of the damage forward. The science pointed to something called a sensitive period, a window early in life when the brain is being built and is desperately hungry for responsive care, during which it's both most vulnerable to neglect and most able to heal from it. Miss too much of that window, and some doors get harder to reopen. So now zoom back to the question we started with. What actually happens to a neglected child? Because the Romanian orphanages are an extreme, but the same machinery runs, more quietly, in ordinary homes. The child whose parent is physically present but emotionally somewhere else, absorbed in a phone, in work, in their own pain, fed, clothed, housed, and not responded to. The still face, not for 2 minutes, but as the background condition of a childhood. That child grows up, and they usually don't grow up saying, "I was neglected," because nothing dramatic happened. That's the cruel part. There's no single scene to point to. Instead, they grow up having quietly absorbed the exact lesson the experiment teaches, that reaching out doesn't work, so they stop reaching. They become the adult who can't ask for help, who feels like a burden the second they need something, who goes silent instead of saying they're hurt, who struggles to trust that anyone will stay, or to believe their own needs are even allowed to take up space, who often can't soothe themselves because no one ever soothed them enough for them to learn how. And they'll usually have no idea why, because the wound wasn't something that was done to them. It was something that was never done for them. That's the strange, quiet horror of neglect. Abuse leaves you with something to point at. Neglect leaves you with an absence, a space where the responding was supposed to be. You can't remember the thing that hurt you, because the thing that hurt you was a thing that never happened. But hold on to what those Romanian children proved, because it's the truest note to end on. The brain that was shaped by absence can be reshaped by presence. Healing is slowest the longer the window is missed, but the window does not close all the way. Responsive care rebuilds people. The dimmer can come back up. And for the adult still quietly carrying that childhood, it means the reaching you gave up on can be learned again. Later, harder, but really, with people, and often with help, who finally reach back. So if this made you think about a child you know, or the child you once were, tell me in the comments. What's the one thing you most wish someone had responded to? I read them all. Subscribe if you want more of the mind explained properly, and I'll see you in the next one.